kind of work site, that kind of work to be shown. But underlying this was a recognition that it was labour that was mobile as well as capital, and I think that was a really important insight. Now, for me, that argument changed my understanding of globalization and actually shaped a lot of the work that I've been involved with since. I did some work on Burmese migrant workers, BMWs I call them, in Thailand, which were a particular form of migrant workers in the garment industry, and I'm doing some work currently, or I'm supporting some work in Ethiopia and Myanmar, where it is domestic rather than international migration that provides the pools of cheap female labour for competition, for production, for the global market. And the other thing I did, this is what I was looking for, I did a project on South Asian women workers in Britain in industrial disputes from Brunswick. It's the 40th anniversary to Gay Gourmet, and actually we produced a comic which, if people are interested, I can show you, which documents, and we've got a very nice website and so on. But the basis for me of that work was the engagement with the work Swasti did in the 1980s.
88.
Yeah, showing 86, that must I can Google speak. Now, but what I wanted to tell you, that the article was published in the journal Capital and Class, which is the journal of an organisation that some of us were quite involved with, called the Conference of Socialist Economists, CSE. And I was on the editorial board at that time when that article...
Can I just say that came out of another attempt to link the left. The only thing that survived was the Conference of Socialist Economists.
And the journal it is still going. But I have to tell you that the majority of the editorial board were absolutely horrified at this. I mean, they were fully immersed in the kind of post-war Fordist paradigm and, mass production and neat internationalization of labor, and that the oil crisis and the downturn in the 1970s was forcing this international, and they wouldn't entertain the idea that this actually could possibly be true, because as we all know, homeworking and the informal economy doesn't happen in a regulated economy like the UK. It must be nonsense. And we had quite a fight about it with what I used to call the male leftovers, who were going even in a previous era. And actually Anna Collett was on the editorial board at that time, and Anna and I held our ground and insisted that it should be published. And of course it is one of the most cited articles from that journal, but I mean the struggles went on at different levels. So even though I think they found it quite unsettling to accept that this form of production and exploitation was alive and well and taking place in a house near them, I mean they just didn't like it. So I think one of the other things about this piece of work is I think it really influenced a lot of mainstream scholarship, because a lot of the work that we've done and Swasti did and so on, have been marginal in terms of what mainstream economics and political economy debates are about. And this, I think, really shifted the terrain, because she's presented the empirical data as well as the economic analysis to indicate that actually, and it was based on empirical work, and my experience with economists is they don't like empirical work. What other people do. So I think that was very important. But I also think that that work was a classic example of what has now come to be called intersectionality. And in this, I think Swasti did, as in other ways, lead the way. Because, this was about the intersection of gender and class and ethnicity, and looked at the experience of work in a context, not out of context. So the fact that, as we've said, there are many reasons why minority women were forced into this kind of income-generating activity, to do with all kinds of social constraints, racism in the labour market, fear of immigration control, patriarchal control within the household, you know, there are all kinds of reasons why this happened, and I think it opened up that debate as well. And we can see these issues in modern forms of unregulated work, some of which are hidden, and I think Carol's research showed that quite well, that there is a lot of home-based production which is not regulated or counted in official statistics. But also, you know, the whole gig economy, Uber, homey stuff as well, which is very in the public sphere, but I mean, I think this is anecdotal, it hasn't yet been verified, but I think a very high proportion of that extreme form of precarious labour are from migrant communities. And it's totally unprotected in terms of the kind of social wage. I mean, you know, no pensions, no unemployment benefit, no sick pay, no social protection. It's stripping labour bare to the unit, to the gig that it performs in terms of that contract. And as I think I said before, the other thing that I think is important about that work is that is Swasti's work, is that she looked at things. She included the prism of technology to understand what was going on in terms of the global economy. And she, and so if we take that lens to understand the current development of insecure, precarious employment, technology is actually in the centre of it. I mean, some reports I read, I mean, the reason I know this is that I talked to the Ruskin students this morning. They asked me to talk about the gig economy, so I had to do some reading quite quickly. But after the downturn, after the financial crisis in 2008, there's a US Bureau of Labour report that says that they only increased spending on employment by 2%, but they increased spending on technology, something like 250%. So the investment is going into the technology, not the worker. The technology facilitates a contract between producer or service provider and customer, and there's absolutely no employment contract. Now I know this has been legally contested in terms of Uber and things, but it's the technology that is facilitating the attack on the protection and the conditions of these workers. And it's worse than 0-hour contracts are rubbish. But there's a contract, you know, in these kind of exchanges. You cut out the contract with the worker entirely. And that's something I think that is a big challenge for organising. I mean, as people have said, we have to ask the right questions. And I think just as when we look at modern forms of home-based working, I think modern forms, and Diane was talking earlier about using the locality as the basis of organising. And you know, some of the things that we did with the Burmese migrant workers was to talk about horizontal kind of linkages rather than just the vertical supply chain. And also, I think there's aspects of the living wage campaign which are locality and multi-sectorally based. But I think, you know, it's a real challenge, this kind of technology-driven forms of precarious working that is facilitated by increasingly, and it will get worse, stringent immigration controls, because all the indications are that migration control serves as a bridge under which migrants come. And I've got a photograph, which I haven't got now, when we were doing the work on the border with Thailand and Burma, Myanmar, in a place called Mysok, where there's a big concentration of garment factories, and there is 100% Burmese workforce. And there's a bridge, like there often is, a friendship bridge, which is the official border between the two countries. And I've got these photographs of all these people literally coming underneath the bridge, or crossing the river and so on. And so migration controls, as we, are going to get worse in the UK, post-Brexit, in the US, Here's what's his name. That will not stop these flows of undocumented, unprotected migrant labour who are going to be a very profitable source of profits and rent for these providers. So I think that's the challenge. I haven't got the answers. I wish Swasti was here to help us ask the right question. But I think, again, it does show the relevance of Swasti's work today.
So let's go on to Diane and then have the discussion together. I wanted to pick up a different strand of Swasti's work that we haven't talked about so much. Perhaps because it wasn't in the amount of words devoted to it. Not so many words were devoted to it as the kinds of issues that we have discussed, but I think it's particularly pertinent today. So I'm referring to the section right at the end of Common Fate, Common Bond, where Swasti takes up the issue of alternative economic strategies, trying to reshape the context in which we are struggling to improve people's rights. And she reflects in this on the experience of the Greater London Council in the mid-80s. Several people here, she already mentioned that work, in the London Industrial Strategy, which I used to have on my bookshelves until a South Korean student came to do his PhD on municipal socialism in the 1980s, and he couldn't find a copy, so I gave it to him. And she identifies out of those ideas that were around at the time in the London Economic Industrial Strategy, the idea of providing work for all those who wish it in jobs that are geared towards meeting social needs. And that the role of technology in such a scheme is to reskill labour and therefore improve its competitiveness rather than to de-skill workers for the benefit of management. So she was envisioning the situation where technology could play a different role, where technology would be at the service of labour rather than as a way of downgrading, denigrating, exploiting labour. And but she also, and so she's in a way drawing to our attention some of the good things about the new vision that the London Economic Strategy and similar work of that sort in the mid-80s tried to put forward. But she does identify some shortcomings in that. For instance, that it didn't take up the issue of hours of work, a question, and I quote, that many feminist economists see as crucial to progress in achieving equality between genders. Without provision for shorter working hours and a more flexible pattern of employment, which would make it possible for the tasks involved in bringing up children to be shared, gender equality will be hard to achieve. An insight which I think is just as pertinent today as it was in the mid-80s. She also discusses another project that was around at the time called the Alternative Economic Strategy, which was an attempt to have a kind of broader view of an alternative economic strategy for Europe. But she makes a similar sort of criticism, I think, that Ruth was making about the Board of Capital and Class, saying that it reflects the traditions of a male-dominated labour movement. The agenda, she said, puts more emphasis on the manufacturing sector, which is viewed as an engine of growth, and less on the services, which are the basis for distributive justice. She goes on to say, neither it is consider the arbitrariness in the definition of skills and in the notion of a family wage, two factors that have been instrumental in subjecting women to the status of low-paid workers. And I think these are also insights that remain very important today. And as we confront the enormous challenges of post-Brexit and Trump, then I think that notion of we can't have a backward-looking alternative that puts all the emphasis on the manufacturing sector and ignores services, I think is important. And also we hear a lot about the alternatives must be based on upskilling the population without really problematizing this understanding of skill and what counts as low skill and what counts as higher skilled. And the point that Ruth was making about, oh well, these women have naturally got nimble fingers, we don't have to train them. They're low skilled, we can pay them their wages without looking at the intangible skills that women possess that they'd acquired through their socialization in households and communities. So this notion of what's high skilled and what's low skilled, if you have a diploma, it's counted as high skill. If it's something you've acquired through experience, it's low skill. And he's still with us today and is very problematic. And she also, this is the last point I raised from what she says at the end of this book, she says it will be futile to counteract the challenges of the global corporations until and unless there are extended social provisions for the care of the young and the elderly and men willing to share domestic work. So I found revisiting these reflections that Swasti made upon alternative economic strategies, both the need for alternative economic strategies, but also her reflections on the limitations of the ones that were on discussion in the 1980s, was very pertinent to the situation we're in today, and actually reflected some of the points that we'd taken up in this group that Ruth and I and some others belong to, called the Women's Budget Group, which does critiques of economic policy in the UK from a feminist perspective. And when there was a lot of discussion, George Osborne was saying, here's my plan A, and then there were people in the trade union movement on the left saying, no, plan A is no good, we have to have plan B. And we looked at plan B, and the points that Swasti was making in the 1980s still seem to be pertinent today in terms of looking at the limitations of plan B. So we came up with plan F, a feminist economic strategy for a caring and a sustainable economy. And we picked up, I reread it, and we included quite a lot of the points that Swasti was making. Invest in social infrastructure, in care, health, education, training services and housing, complemented by investment in renewable energy and environmentally friendly public transport. Those jobs that will meet people's real needs, as well as, of course, improving the terms and conditions of the work of the paid workforce who staff this infrastructure and these services, and ensuring access to affordable care, best achieved through care that is publicly funded and provided for children, for people with illnesses and disabilities, for frail elderly people. Point about the time use point, the length of the working day that Swasti had raised, improved support for people who provide unpaid care in families and communities, but also support men to contribute more to unpaid care, for instance through well-funded care leave schemes and a reduction in full-time working hours. And increase investment in social housing and in insulating homes. So I think, looking back, the kind of points we've made central to our Plan F were very, very much the ones that Swasti had raised. And we were looking forward to creating the kinds of goods and services that people need in their everyday lives through programme public investment. But we did not make an attempt to recreate a manufacturing sector in the UK of the kind we once had, the centre of our planet. And I was so distressed to read interviews with people in the North East who had voted for Brexit and who thought we lost all our manufacturing jobs, we're going to vote for Brexit because then we think that's a chance to get them all back. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think therefore we have to offer alternatives for a way forward to create the kind of alternative economic strategies that Swasti highlighted, that address, what, not trying to recreate the 1950s and the 1960s, the rise of China, the rise of India, the rise of the increase in manufacturing in developing countries. That's then, this is now. So we have to build a future that doesn't try to recreate a past. And I think in doing this we need to be bolder, much bolder than we are. Because one of the things I've learned from Brexit, the vote support Brexit, and for the kind of campaign that Trump conducted and that got him to be the most powerful man in the world, is how bold they were in terms, they did a lot of other things, like they told a lot of lies, but they were very bold in the kind of challenging globalization, in saying we're going to do something different, we're going to address the insecurities of the people who feel insecure, who haven't had an improvement in their living standards in the last 20 years. They've put forward, I think, a false prospectus that doesn't offer real viable strategies for reducing the extreme wealth and the power that goes with it. So if you read who Trump's backers are, the hedge fund managers, people who work for Goldman Sachs, and not just Hillary Clinton, who might call on the backing of Wall Street. I mean, there's all there, these highly rich people supporting Trump. But he offered, and I think we've seen it with Brexit here, a kind of idea that I'm on your side, I understand what it's like to have precarious, insecure work, to feel that you lost your position and your hopes and your aspirations. But it's that grasping of that and that articulating of that insecurity and loss is being done in ways that jeopardize all the values of equality and justice that Swasti held dear. And I think we need to put forward alternatives that address the insecurities of white working class people in Europe, in the USA, while at the same time holding fast to those values and enhancing the struggle against racism, sexism, Islamophobia and xenophobia, all of which are horribly on the increase all across Europe and now all across the United States, I think. So I think we have to be bold and we have to build on the work of people like Swasti to strengthen the common bonds that she talks about in this book, while recognizing the real power of the forces that seek to sunder those bonds and set one against another among those who don't have very much. So that's more than ever necessary, I think. And I think that some of the points that Swasti has here in a brief discussion of alternative economic strategies are ones that we should try to carry forward in ways that help us keep alive some hope in these difficult times. And I should be returning to this, I think, every now and then, for that refreshment of that alternative vision that we need to keep struggling for.
That's rather than bold, they'd say bombastic.
Well, exactly, but nevertheless bold as well. And I think we've not been bold enough. They don't care about people saying, how are we going to pay for this? What about the budget deficit? We shouldn't be cowed by those kind of questions.
I can confirm a friend of mine about the relevance of these discussions about alternatives. A friend of mine at the Labour Party meeting told me a man had popped up and said, no, what we need is blah, 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 blah. And she said, I knew what it was the alternative economic strategy. So she immediately started putting all the feminist arguments about the need to question some of the suppositions in it. So it's, I mean, given that there's great power in that alternative idea, which has been, and it's terrible that it's been taken, appropriated by the right. So we have a bit of a big job to try and adjust this, and I throw it open to your comments, and thank the two speakers, because I mean, again, in times when it's incredibly difficult to be clear and also complicated, you both do this so well.
I don't think what we've discussed so far is around the fact that people live much longer. And it's a small proportion of a woman's life, or a man's life, is in childbearing. You're concentrating all your thoughts on a diminishing part of the human lifespan, are you not?
I don't think so, because you may spend a smaller proportion of your life caring for children, but you spend a larger proportion of your life caring for your frail elderly parents. And indeed, as I become frailer and elderly myself, I think I'm caring for my granddaughter right now, but there's going to be a time when I'm going to need her to care for me.
But there is a big change, is there not, in people's lifespan and their years of health. And your thinking on these topics has got to accommodate that, hasn't it?
I don't think it doesn't. What I think the feminist approach focuses on is the centrality of care, and how the centrality of care in terms of both our need for care and our ability to provide care for others gets sidelined by so many discussions about of economics and what kinds of... the group that Ruth and I belong to did a piece of work recently for the International Trade Union Congress on what would happen if you invested 2% of GDP in 7 OECD countries in paid work in the care sector, publicly provided. And they compared the jobs you would create, the tax revenue you would generate, with what happens if you invest the same amount in the construction sector. Actually, you generate more jobs and more revenue if you invest in the care sector. But so often we hear now about strategies for recovery of the economy that focus on investment in the physical infrastructure that will be channeled first and foremost through the construction sector, and not about investment in the care sector that is equally important, I think.
It's even more important. It's even more important. Sorry.
Annika had something. Carry on with this then.
Just wanted to say it's even more important now, I would say, because the provision of care is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, whether it's the hospital sending patients home earlier, or whether it's the increase in prices or the non-existence of childcare. Austerity has meant less care, and hence the argument has become even more powerful and more valid now.
And I think, Trump said this in his acceptance speech.
We don't mention it.
I'm going to make America great again. I'm going to, put America back to work. We're going to invest in bridges and roads, the whole list. And I was sitting there saying, yeah, men's jobs. But they're not investing in the social infrastructure. God, you want to
say that? But were you going to say something on that as well? Yeah, I've just been doing some work at sort of second hand with someone who's done some field work with domestic care migrant workers. And I've been sort of doing the writing, and she provided them empirical data. So I didn't actually interview any of these women, but I've begun to feel that I know them rather well. But it really struck me that the skill, one of the things of a feminist alternative economic strategy is about the way in which women's caring skills are valued. And there was a bright moment a few years ago when I think it was Unison and the other unions and the health service actually put into job evaluations emotion work, for example. It seems to me that these sorts of things are really, given our demographics that you mentioned before, are things that really need to have a strong focus. When I was looking at this, I thought, well, who else does caring skills? The medical profession. You know, and they're at the top of the sort of professional ladder, and they get paid, I don't know how many times, domestic care workers. And it seems to me that this invisibility of particularly migrant care workers that you mentioned is a really critical thing. And I'm not sure that I'd agree with you, Ines, because there are a lot of migrants filling these positions.
No, I'm thinking more of what the state provides.
Yes,
Virtually
yes,
disappears.
yes, and a lot of these women, this was in Berlin, Istanbul and London, a lot of them were doing domestic care work through agencies which were being employed by local authorities or the health service. So it's complicated, you've got all these chains going on, but actually to put the work of caring, wherever it is, whatever profession, into the centre seems to me to be something that, you know, we could turn it all upside down and do.
I'd like to just add to that, that when you put the value on care, it's also a very generally socially radical concept, because by taking it further and saying, actually, there are also men who, you know, who are low-paid people who are doing care,
Yeah.
and they too tend to get overlooked, you know, porters and hospitals, for example. That you then say there's something that's coming from the experience of a particular social group, women, and you can take that outwards into a wider critique of what the values of our society have completely denied. Yes.
Yes.
So well, actually, it's kind of rounding up, because the visibility, I know, but at least two of my seminars were on visibility of the invisible and the action needed for all that. And I think we are now mostly all retired, and still there is a need of that this will be happening again with new analysis, with new people coming on, and I think that will happen, because I'm still a very optimistic person. But I think one of the things I want to add towards Swasti is that where she wanted to share her knowledge with, because she wanted to change, I think what was really a factor then is her generosity to work and to cooperate with a lot of people. If you, if you would, I don't think if there's a complete list of her work, but there is a lot of work which she done together with another. So there are no people here of the UN circles where she worked in, and that's it's a different organized world in which she had to struggle very hard. And where we started to work on friendship, on trust, I know I visited you, so somewhere in the 80s, no, you know, completely different people starting to work together because we wanted to share, we had a goal. And there's a real factor in this need to share because there was a goal. And that is a factor missing in probably a new generation, but they will learn it. If the moment you share and you network. Now networking is a lot of, they say it's easier because of the technology, but of the intensity of people working on it and with each other, that is another form where you need trust, you need a common idea, a common bound probably. So this is because you can go back to the book of the 80s, but her work in the 90s and later is as important because there's a lot of vision in it of what is going on with this world. And so I think we missed Cecilia Nunn, whom she did a lot of work. in looking at long lines towards the future. So we are not yet ready. It's Swasti. I don't know whether we're going to write a real article on future lines, which you've set out, but I think there is a real value in, but the generosity and the friendship, and as Rana said, the fun we had made us go, and that was really really important. Thank you.
You know that I know and love the F-plan, I'm sorry, the feminist planner. But I just wanted to ask a question that I've sometimes thought and have never asked. It's about how could we possibly turn the idea of getting a man to do a job that is societally valued as lesser than those traditional jobs, which are the big idea that that's why they're all going for it, because they want that halcyon 1950s past of a job that makes them feel masculine. So I totally get it at the planet. Apart from that, and in Oxfam at the moment, people have discovered social norms and the idea that one should be challenging masculinities in a range of contexts, including working in fragile, conflict-affected contexts, and to an extent working, I think, in communities that have that heavy industry and now don't. But how on earth would we get a government to do that? And also, how on earth could we possibly be selling an idea which actually makes, men in the Welsh valleys, we know that they did, that this is what happened when the mines went. Women went into Tesco's and did those jobs, and the men would prefer to stay at home because it was just too depressing to make that cultural shift. So all thoughts on that welcome.
There's nothing like paying well to make a job more attractive to men, I think. Yeah, nursing is a good example of one that's transformed the gender balance in nursing now. So paying well, I think, is important. And so it's important to work on this issue of changing social norms, but not in isolation. So my son at the moment is doing some training that will enable him to go into secondary schools and work with young men now students in secondary school, exploring, opening up about these issues about masculinity, how is it constructed, what role does parent values play within that. And so we need money for that. That's where the state can come in, but also we need the private sector to change the way it employs people. There are structural constraints on how far these norms can change, and so I think it's also important. That's where this issue about the length of the standard working week. Men work at least 40 hours in paid work, and women should do maybe 20 hours in paid work if they've got little children and so forth. So I think those structural constraints are the same, and that's where the state in terms of regulation, the state in terms of subsidising various things, the social security system. There are lots of ways. What won't work is simply kind of preaching to men that they should do more of the childcare without changing any of the structural constraints, I think.
So, Rana, and then Ruth wants to come.
Just to agree with and add to that, it's important also to remember that different types of work, gendered work, are constructed differently in different cultures. So, for instance, Ruth will probably have to once again give you statistics on this. In the old Soviet Union, I think a very large proportion of doctors were female, and they were generally very badly paid. So professionalisation per se, in China today, oddly enough, that's not oddly enough, why should it be odd? But a very large number of judges, particularly at the sort of below Supreme Court levels, are women. Judges, I think, are not particularly well paid. The judges also are not always perceived as necessarily entirely free of corruption either, but that's a gender issue, I suspect. But it has to do again with a whole variety of expectations in society there as well. So, I think some of those things also need to be done. The divide between the professional and non-professional, even in gender terms, is not the only division.
Doctors in medical profession, the Czech Republic and Poland are feminised and very poorly paid, and lots have been on strike recently.
Who's having years off now?
It is happening, yeah, absolutely.
10% going to invest in, and they're changing the pay structure of
Yes.
medical
Yes.
staff, so it's
Yeah.
whether it's purely around gender, I don't know, but I think that's
Yeah.
They can do it at Wimbledon.
We're losing
Wimbledon,
the track now because we've got
female tennis players are paid as much as male tennis players.
Only very recently.
Very recently, and they work and they play for less time.
But football is up.
that we've got someone over there.
Full of pies. I'm Barbara Harris' wife. I'm sorry, I can't see you in focus, yes. I just wondered whether the people who are researchers from Oxfam, as well as our distinguished panellists, could reflect a bit on the implications of a universal basic income for the care economy. Whether that's even on the agenda in Britain in the way that it's beginning to happen in India.
Right. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say something about this care issue. And I think, yes, we do need to pay properly, but I think the same in our culture, what I call cuddly care, I mean, is so deeply ingrained as being like nimble fingers, a female attribute, that it doesn't command a premium in the labour force. And one of the things, I'm just part of a group with my women's budget group hat on, and some and Forceps Society, and some academics from Warwick. And we did a report which was called A New Deal for Care and Carers, which we presented at the House of Lords beginning of last week. Nobody listened. But one of the things I discovered in doing that work is that if you're unemployed or you're on job seekers allowance and you go to the DWP and you're a woman, the jobs they send you for are care jobs. And I talked to some people who were in that position, and I say, you mean there's a woman coming in and they say, right, you do care? I said, no, it's not like that. What they do, and they can be quite nice about it, and they work with you and they look at your CV, and what are women in that position likely to have the most experience? Yeah, and so they say, right, there's these care vacancies, and it's the gendering is institutionalized. And that is why I think it's so hard to kind of shape. And there is this assumption that, we all love to do it for love. Well, maybe some of us do, and some of us don't. But, not being wanting to look after your elderly parent or your infant granddaughter or whatever isn't something that is socially acceptable. I think it is institutionally as well as culturally gendered. The other thing I wanted to say,
the state is counting on it, that we do it for care.
To reinforce the point that Diane was making about, the points about the length of the working day and things were so important. As I said before, I did this work on Bromwick and Gate Orme, and we interviewed, I think, 6 of the then surviving Bromwick strikers, as well as, I think, 30 of the Gate Orme workers. But one thing that is in dispute, really, about the Bromwick strike, because the trade union movement heralded it as the moment where they fought for unionisation of women's workers and black workers, and it's this iconic moment, even though the union movement sold them out and things. But when you actually look at the accounts and listen to people's accounts of why they withdrew their labour, they withdrew the main thing, the touchstone, apart from sort of ongoing kind of degrading management and things, was forced overtime. Because what the workers were saying, if we are told an hour before the end of their shifts that we have to stay 3 hours and we can't go home and make the supper and things, we can't operate our lives. And a couple of the women actually said, we had more freedom when we were on the picket line than we did when we were working, because we could be in charge of our working day. We could decide when we did our domestic work and when we were on the picket line and things. And I think that's something that the trade union movement has still, as well as government regulation, has still to get their minds around. Anyway, and the other thing that I wanted to say about the universal basic income. Now, in a sense, we've had this in terms of wages for housework, in that there has been argued that there should be a stipend for people who are not deemed to be economically active. Now, the universal basic income is a different thing because it's about giving people a subsistence income with no penalties if they earn more and things. And it is something that I think in developing countries where there's no social protection at all has been, is being taken up certainly by ILO and UNDP and some progressive state governments in India and things. But the way it's being discussed in the West is in terms of citizens' basic income, and I think that's really important because it problematizes the whole issue of who is a citizen, who has entitlement, who's paid into the system and thing. And because of the history of welfare payments in it, I mean, I think that's a real challenge to promote that idea.
Yeah, I think it's certainly very, very interesting the way this idea, which has been around quite a long time, is coming up the agenda now in terms of its discussion in various fora. And I can see, the attraction of something that can break through the logjam that we're in now with the deterioration of the welfare state, and you're deserving and you're not deserving, and all this obfuscation about who pays and who gets and who qualifies for this, and the incredible apparatus of bureaucratic rights-denying surveillance that we've now developed mean that it's attractive to look at an idea like basic income, which everybody gets, no matter who they are, what they are. I think there is an issue about, do you get it if you live in a place, or do you get it if you're a citizen of a place? So I think there's, exactly, as I was saying, do you get it like a human right because you happen to be there and you get it wherever you are, or do you get it because you're a citizen and you've undertaken, or you will undertake certain duties and obligations as a citizen? And that's a complex issue, which and then how do you discuss this in ways that overcome this notion of, well, we don't want people getting something for nothing, which is there in so much of the impetuses behind the deterioration of the welfare state. But I think it's a very, very important idea for us to think about and debate as a way of trying to sort of break through the situation that we've now got to with the what once was a reasonably good, although male breadwinner biased welfare state. So let's not be over romantic about what we did have, but we certainly had a terrible deterioration, and we do need another way forward. In a world in which, remember, that welfare state was designed in a context in which men had decent jobs for life and women had secondary jobs when they weren't doing their caring duties, but kind of unemployment and jobs with no very precarious, insecure things. It was just short-lived. You might be out of work for 2 or 3 months and you'd have your unemployment benefit, but then you'd get another one with rights and protections and so forth, which doesn't exist anymore. So the way labour markets change with the kinds of findings that came out of Carol's work on home-based work, I think means it's something. And I'm sure if Swasti were here, she'd be wanting to debate this quite vigorously.
Analysis and rankers.
Yes.
Yeah. Silence. Any more comments?
Yes, I've got a comment there. Are you from the Netherlands? Was it a couple of decades or so ago that in the Netherlands there was some sort of agreement between unions